Welcome to today's episode of Getting to Know You. I'm your host, Cameron Edward Benton, and on today's episode, I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Jessica Stahl. Jessica is the creative director, founder, and cartoonist behind her hit webcomic, Vanilla Cool Dance, which sparks important conversations around taboo topics through her empowered female character as she navigates the dating world and sex world of our modern age. And I've been a big fan of Jessica's comics for quite some time. And so it was an absolute delight to actually get to interview her and get to know her. She has such an amazing curiosity and outspokenness and just an amazing gift that she has to embrace her full self, whether it's her awkwardness or her sexuality or her outspokenness on particular topics. She's just a great example on how to live a more authentic life, which she often expresses through this kind of character, this expression of herself through Vanilla Cool Dance. And in this conversation, we go to a lot of different topics. We talk about the ever evolving dynamics between men and women, what it's like to date in Denmark compared to the United States, and some quirky things that she likes and does not like out there. We also jump into her recent nude photo shoot and what that was like for her, why she chose to do that, why she chose to share those photos as well, versus just doing them for herself and maybe talking about it, but not, posting that out there for other people. And finally, we also jump into a really important topic that is near and dear to both of our hearts, which is the topic of shame. How and why that became such an important topic for her, and how she chooses to tackle that subject through her character and how she chooses to tackle it through her life. We'll also go into her own shifting and evolving relationship dynamics and how that is a continuous evolution for herself as she figures out what's next for her life and what she wants for her dating experience in the long term. Again, Jessica, it was just an absolute blast to get to interview, and she was so much fun to chat with, and we had such an important and I think fascinating dialogue around men and women in this conversation. So I hope that you stay tuned. And without further ado, here is getting to know Jessica Stahl. All right, so on today's show, we have Jessica Stahl. She is a creative director, artist, and the creator of the taboo breaking cartoon Vanilla Cool Dance. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Hi, Cameron. I'm very excited to be chatting with you today.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be chatting with you. I have been a follower of your comic or your cartoon for at least a couple of years, and I think it's very poignant. It's very funny. It's very honest and vulnerable and very real a lot of the time, and it's something that is I know, always a joy when it pops up in my feed. So it's a pleasure to get to speak with you.
Thank you. So you're an original cool dancer then?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. I mean, I often I think follow vibes of female empowerment and sexual empowerment and these types of thing, which I think is honestly where I would love to start off this conversation with you. Because when I went to your website, uh, one of the key tagline that you have is "Live shamelessly," and I know from myself that like breaking free of shame has been sort of this like lifelong process and probably will continue to be. And I find from the work of like Brene Brown and the seeing the effects of shame in my own life and how I think it affects a lot of people. That's probably one of the biggest like I don't know existential crises to figure out how to overcome. So I'm curious, like, how did you get to that point where that was like sort of became your mantra or the mantra for Vanilla Cool Dance at least?
Good question. I think that we, especially growing up in the States, well, I mean, the States is further along than many countries in terms of talking openly about things, but still so far to go,
Mhm.
especially with the older generations. But
Mhm.
not talking about things is what creates more shame. And so I noticed that in my own life, the fact that everything that I'm shameful of is probably something that somebody else or a million other people feel the exact same way. And yet we don't all know about each other's shame because we all keep it inside. And so
Mhm.
what I feel is that when we all have open and safe conversations about the things that we feel shame about, we realize that it's actually very normal, and that power of reclaiming that shame or taking back the power that it has over us helps you to live more shame free and more shamelessly and a lighter version of yourself.
Mhm. Awesome. Beautiful. And well said. Um, I'm curious, like, where in your life did you first notice shame, and how did you kind of first start to unpack or deal with it, or I would say like throw off that old coat?
Hmm. Um, Let me think. Where did I first feel shame? That's a really good question because I'm sure I first felt shame not with my sexuality because I'm sure there were things that I felt shameful of
Yeah,
before that. I
yeah.
think that in high school I was voted most awkward in and
Awesome.
and I actually, let me scratch that. When I grew up, I had a lazy eye growing up.
Mm,
So, and also sometimes they crossed.
mm,
And then we tried for years to fix them with glasses or contacts, and it
mm,
wasn't fully fixed until I was in high school and I had a operation on it.
mm,
And so I think for a lot of my childhood, I felt really embarrassed because of that, and was also
mm,
bullied or teased for that. As you can imagine, kids are cruel.
yeah.
And one thing that I notice is that I now live in the Netherlands, and when you there's actually quite a few people in the Netherlands that have a lazy eye, for instance, or grew up
Oh
with a
wow.
lazy eye, but they'll just say, "Oh yeah, I had a lazy eye when I was younger," or
Mm,
they just name it what it is,
mm,
or they're very good at pointing out like, "Oh, you have a lazy eye," and then moving on with their day, instead of
mm,
looking behind you. Or and of course the Netherlands, we can get into how Dutch directness is not necessarily the end all be all example, but
mhm,
I realized that if my lazy eye came back in the Netherlands, I would be probably more slow to get the surgery or care less
mm,
what people thought, just because of how the society made me feel there, as opposed to growing up with this instance. So I guess that would probably be my very first instance of insecurity. And
mm.
again, hearing like 20 people say, "Oh, I had one when I was younger. Oh, I had one when I was younger." Maybe not 20, but then you're like, "Oh, I'm not the only one that had this." And that already made me feel safer, even though I don't have it now.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome, and thank you for sharing that. I just spilled ink or like water on my journal, and it's bleeding everywhere. Um, so that's fun. But so the question that I have with that, and is you were born and raised in Maryland, and now you're living in Amsterdam. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and you mentioned a little bit, which I was planning to get into a little bit later, but I think it just weaves perfectly. It was like how, or one of the things that I'm noticing in that is like there's something about like the directness of almost like calling the thing out from other people and like seeing it versus, I'm curious, like maybe people pretending it's not there, but you can feel them like looking, or there's that kind of like feeling almost on eggshells versus somebody just like saying it. And it's something that I notice too, where it's like when somebody just says the thing, then it's like, oh, I kind of just feel safe enough to relax because they see me with all these things. I'm not trying to like hide this part, which I know is a big part of shame, is like hiding.
Yeah. And I think when it comes with, well, of course, there's also your own internal confidence. If
Mm.
I came to the Netherlands and they said, "Oh, you have a lazy eye," and I was
Mm.
super insecure about it, I would probably not like that at all. But what I do like is that they name it, or they say it often without judgment. They say it just
Mhm.
as a fact,
Yeah.
and as opposed to assigning a negative or positive to something.
Mm.
Oh, you have a pimple. I mean, I don't know why they have to say it, but it's like, yeah, I do. Oh, you have a hickey. Yes. you know, it's, it's like there's not really a maybe there's no reason to say it, which we can get into also, but the
Mm.
fact that it's kind of just stated as a yes, this is a fact, it's
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we to a certain degree like we have like a desire like to be seen in like a lot of different ways, right? Like whether, and often like especially with more of like an intimate partner, kind of what we're hoping, I think, is to often be seen in our all of our flaws and love for
Mhm,
those things.
mhm,
I know some of the like emotional relationship work I've
mhm.
done is like definitely finding like being able to love those parts that I feel insecure, and finding people who love those parts of me that are, that I typically would normally want to hide,
Yeah,
is a big part of
absolutely.
that.
And I think it also helps you take ownership of it. I mean, I went out once with somebody who had a stutter, and he
Mm.
just told me before the date, just so you know, I have a stutter, and then it was fine on the date, or like it was a nice date. But
Yeah.
if he didn't say anything, maybe, and I'm probably not in a place to say, I'm not that Dutch to say, oh, you have a stutter, but it kind of just is a fact, and then it's
Right.
totally fine. It just
Yeah.
is what it is. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Um, yeah. And it's almost like if he didn't mention that too, then you're kind of put in this position of like, do I mention it? Do I
yeah,
pretend like I don't
exactly.
see it? It just becomes this like awkward dance versus being able to like acknowledge what exists, I guess.
Yeah, so owning, I think, things about yourself takes away a bit of the power of um, yeah, if you say something confidently, then you, it it's not nothing's a big deal. Okay.
You're good. You're good.
You can cut that out. Yes, if you communicate confidently about something, you minimize the importance of it, the weight, the heaviness of it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. How did you because at least through the comic and it seems your art, you seem to have developed a lot of inner confidence and a lot of self-love and a lot of, being able to be like, hey, I feel um maybe awkward, but like I'm letting people see me in my awkwardness and in my boldness and in my sexuality and all these different aspects of yourself, which sounds like was not necessarily where you started. So how did you initially go about like developing that sort of inner confidence for yourself?
Mm. Well, when I started drawing vanilla dance, I was living in a university house with 17 flatmates in a small illegal room that I bribed them to let me live in. And I was really not confident because I was unemployed and I had just moved to the Netherlands and I had a breakup. So I started the account originally drawing just about my life. So then it was really a diary. So everything that was happening in
Mm.
the cartoon. So if you scroll back 6 or 7 years ago, it's all
Wow.
real, 100% real stories from me.
Mm,
And but what I did was I was trying to reclaim my narrative because for me it felt very
mm,
embarrassing the situation I was in. So I wanted to use this creative outlet as a way I to rewrite that narrative and reclaim my own story. I just definitely did it with a lot of self-deprecating humor at first, which is
mhm,
of course a defense mechanism as well, but it helped me relate to more people. And I think what
mm,
helped me become more confident was so many people were relating back to the cartoons I was putting out. So what I was experiencing was experienced by so many other people in the world. And that made me feel way less alone and way more
mm,
normal with my experiences. And I think that helped me feel inspired to keep going and also to connect with more people and to hear about other people's stories as well. The character Vanilla Quiddance definitely went on a journey and became more confident in herself and very opinionated as well.
mhm,
And I don't know if I have that, or I definitely don't have that all the time in my own life. I think
mhm,
I often think, okay, what would Vanilla Quiddance do? Or
mm,
how would Vanilla Quiddance think? But at the end of the day, Vanilla Quiddance is just one part of all of us. So
yeah,
she's the most confident, outspoken, bold part of all of us. But we also all have other parts of ourselves that we have to honor or sometimes listen to them more. So sometimes I get into difficulties when I'm feeling
mm,
really insecure and falling into my own traps because then
mm,
I think, well, Vanilla Cordians wouldn't handle it like this. She'd just move
mm.
on. But I'm there crying. So it's a constant journey.
Yeah, yeah. Well, how have you dealt with that tension? Because I think a lot of times with art, especially when it's very personified and very personal, and there is that kind of archetypal character that we deal with, we can um, ironically almost like create a shame narrative around like, well, I'm not living up to that thing that I'm putting out. Like, how have you kind of like dealt with that back and forth?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I draw about it as well. So, for instance, if I have a breakup and I'm
Mm,
feeling uh, sad, I will draw about the heartbreak.
mm,
Not everything has to be, it's, I think, part of what Vanilla Quittance is also meant to teach is that it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to be in these periods of pain because they're also periods of growth. What else do I do? I have a coach now, so she
Okay.
now wants me to answer this question. It's really on her list, like who is Vanilla Cool Dance and who is Jessica, and how are they different and how are they similar. So we'll go into that. I
That's
think
cool.
to figure that out as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Is that literally like a general life coach, or is it like for relationships or some sort of speciality?
Right now it's for general, but we focus on a lot of different things. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Perfect.
yeah,
Cool. That's
yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I have
I
a lot of.
definitely believe in coaching.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a big fan. I have like a relationship coach right now. I have a fitness coach and I have a therapist. So,
There we go.
um, a team of people who are all designed to help me not
That's
be,
great.
yeah, be the best version of myself, I guess. Um, cool. Well, I guess it's kind of diving more into the actual like cartoon. Like, have you always been? I know that you're a creative director, and so you must have always probably been artistic. Has drawing always been your primary medium?
Definitely not.
Oh.
I no. I started the account not even thinking I could draw.
Mm.
I, I'm actually quite a written. How do I say like
A
a
writer?
Yeah, or I think via writing. So even
Mhm.
when I am coming up with ideas for cartoons, they're not normally sketches at first. They're normally just notes documents.
Mm,
So it's interesting because you'll see, of course, other artists who are just constantly sketching, or if they're on a call or sketching, and I'm actually just taking notes.
mm,
So I never thought that I was a good artist. I did think I was good creative, so the ideas were always there, but I was unemployed, as I mentioned, and I was looking at different projects. And I actually took a Skillshare course by
mm,
Mari Andrew, and she talked about her process. And I think somewhere along the way, I realized that it's more about the concept than necessarily the aesthetic. I think the aesthetic is
mhm,
very important as well. And I think that I've developed a very unique style to
mhm.
vanilla Cool Dance along the way. But originally they started as just little, glorified stick figures and
Mhm.
somehow grown. But
Yeah.
no, definitely was not drawing perfectly when I was younger. Always was insecure about it too. So funny.
Yeah. Well, that makes me feel better as we're kind of ironically talking about shame because I have a desire more recently to create and share certain like comics and stuff. I've always been a huge fan of comics and cartoons, and similarly, like I have always been a terrible drawer. Like my handwriting has always been a struggle. Like I've just never had that like fine tunedness.
Me too.
But like words are my thing. Like I can sit and like write in my journal for hours and just be happy. Um,
But yeah,
so,
do you know hyperbole and a half? Have
no,
you
I
ever
don't. No.
this was like, I don't even know if there's still new content coming out, but this was before Instagram. I remember in 2011 being obsessed with this cartoon,
Hmm.
and it's just a blob. Also, sticks. The
Mhm,
really famous artist that's actually a stick figure, but they have so much emotion in them, and I think
mhm.
that those are counts are so inspiring because it's really about the how a simple blob figure or a stick figure can really tell a story.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's been really cool. I recently spoke to this designer and he was into it and he's like just an amazing conversation that I had with him and he was talking all about how AI is changing everything and all this different stuff. And he's like the things that like AI will not be able to do is create an input, right? Like it still needs the human input. And so the like he's like from his opinion, the two things that we are going to become the most valuable skill sets are actually going to be writing and drawing. We're kind of going back to this like more, for lack of a better word, primitive, not primitive, but like not, I don't know, contemporary. I don't know what the right word is, but older mediums, kind of more raw mediums of drawing and writing, because those are the things that are going to be used to create the inputs to create the more like complex arts using these technologies. Um, and so I started like I bought a sketchbook that he recommended to like, start learning how to do some basic sketching and just start to practice drawing, like you said, there's different smiley faces that how can I communicate all of these different things with just a simple smiley face, right? And kind of just start there. And it's a fun process for sure.
Wow. What's the book?
I don't know. I can grab it real quick. I'll see if I can have it. It's like right over here. Um, he recommended Presto Sketching.
Presto Sketching.
Yeah, so it's Presto Sketching: The Magic of Simple Drawing for
Oh,
Brilliant
nice.
Product Thinking and Design. So it's using drawing from his end specifically on like how to communicate ideas and concepts and stuff like that. Um, yeah, yeah,
Nice.
it's cool. Yeah,
Really
very
cool.
cool. Yeah,
Nice that
thanks.
you're learning.
Yeah, I'm in a big creative process as a whole right now. One of the things that I worked on with my relationship coach is this like has been intentionally developing this like an not experiential, experimental way of being. So really like being like, oh, like well, what if I did this differently? Like what if I did this a different way or tried this out or whatever? Because a lot of times I have had a tendency to just get very rigid on how I do
Hmm.
something, especially if it works right away, and then not wanting to like mess with that. And so being like, all right, well, let me try this. Or like, for example, like this is the first podcast that I've recorded where I am referring to questions from my journal versus like having them in an Evernote document on the same computer and just seeing like, okay, well, how does that change the dynamic that I'm having with the person in front of me? Right.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
it's been
nice to
fun.
play around with.
Yeah, yeah, it's super fun. Have you bring it? I don't know, not super off topic because I guess it is the topic, but there's Rick Rubin's book. Have you read that at all? Are you familiar with him?
No.
No? Okay, so this is a
I,
book
or, but
that
I'm very bad with names, so
yeah, well,
I could
I
be
feel
familiar with them.
so he's like well known to specific people and also like completely not known at all. So he is like credited with like a lot of producer credits or like I don't know what you would call it for a ton of famous music all across the world and different styles of artists and stuff like that. And he actually has this interview where like they're like, so what is it that you do? He's like, I get paid for, I think it's like the confidence that I have in my taste. And he
Mm.
basically is just like, I like this, I don't like that. He doesn't know how to play any musical instruments. It's just like the weirdest, like kind of funniest thing. But he wrote this book called "The Creative Act Way of Being," I believe,
Oh,
very
amazing.
recently, and I think you'd love it because it's
Sounds really
literally
interesting.
yeah, it's just like all of these little things, and you can read it straight through. When I heard him talk about it on a podcast, his dream is that it's sort of a book that you have that you just flip to a random page and like get an insight from, kind of thing. And that's how I've been approaching it, and it is very much like that. Like you can just um, take something and there's some idea that's like, oh, okay, how to play with this, right? And to your kind of original example is like, is that experimentation, right? Like, what is it like to, you know, play with very strict constraints to create this project? Or what if you drew it upside down? Like, what ends up happening if you just do that, right? And just kind of like seeing what happens when you play around with different things and living from that place for me has been super fun. It's made the entire world very creative and enjoyable.
Yeah, it's your playground, and
Yeah,
um, and and it helps definitely with creative block.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I think yeah, the more that you're free from, I don't know, the mental constraints, I think is the biggest thing, right? It's like once you can just get something down, things
Exactly.
start to
Yeah,
flow.
I think at those times that you're open to looking at something upside down
Hmm.
is normally the time when you don't need it as much, you know? I think that's always the problem is how to get your mental state when you're in a stuck space to relax enough to
Yeah,
put something upside down and take the time to explore more.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so what do you do when you're in that space to like help yourself get unstuck? Do you go for a
Oh
run?
my
Do you
gosh.
take a bath? Do you what do you do?
Well, I have had a month because I got myself in the biggest rut
Oh.
um, due to just a lot of pressure that I put on myself that nobody else had put on me,
Hmm.
and also trying to make this into a business. And I just started to feel like it will be the end of the world if X, Y, and Z don't happen.
Hmm.
And what helped me was that I had to take a step back and remember that I was doing this for fun and joy
mm,
in my life in the first place, and that was completely missing. And I specifically was trying to think of an artwork for this street art campaign that I'm doing in
mm,
the Netherlands in a few weeks, and I just wasn't loving any of the ideas I had had, and
mm,
it had been a month or so of drawing and drawing, and so I spent the day, or somebody asked me, what is something that you can do today that is fully within your control that can make this day a little bit more enjoyable? And so then I said,
mm,
oh, well, just drawing cartoons for my account, because I think for me, Instagram has never been a space that I, okay, with the algorithm, of course, there's the pressure to produce content. And
mm,
of course, it's nice if there's more cool dancers out there that want
mm,
to follow the account. I mean, that's always wonderful. But I've always consistently drawn on there mostly for me and, of
mm,
course, for the cool dancers. So
mm,
just by drawing cartoons that were not for any purpose other than for myself and to share with the world. I think during that day, I had an idea for the big project that I had been working on that I had been
mhm,
trying so hard to figure out. So, just by allowing myself to relax and get into a meditative state of drawing for no purpose other than
mm.
for myself, allowed my brain to think of different possibilities. And that helped me get unstuck. Think thank God. Well, but
Yeah.
also at the end of the day, it wouldn't have been a big deal if I hadn't cracked it either, because that's also what I learned is
Mm.
um, yeah, I have to stop taking life so seriously sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's life is pretty ridiculous when you think about it in a lot of different ways. Um, how else do you personally like cultivate joy in your life? Because it sounds like that's a big. Once you were able to cultivate that, you were able to kind of get that freedom from both the hey, if this doesn't work out, I'm still like having a great time, and B, ultimately kind of figuring that out, ironically, through that process.
I think that, well, of course, from I think for me, a lot of joy comes from feeling free and independent in a lot of ways.
Mm,
So, for instance, traveling, I love to go travel by myself, go backpacking. That I always find inspiring and helps me refine the best versions of myself, because you're just alone and out there in the
mhm,
world. And I find it incredibly joyful. Of course, it can also be lonely at times, but you're always able to manage and you surprise yourself in different ways every time. So that brings a lot of joy to me. I also have a really lovely group of friends, so I'm super blessed with that. So, and they're very, very supportive and bring a lot of joy into my life. I like reading a lot, and
mm.
so escaping that way as well. But I think
What
traveling,
Oh, what do you like to read? Do you like to read fiction, nonfiction?
I like to read both. I have had to take a little bit of a pause on reading. You know, I sometimes read too many relationship or communication uh, books,
Mhm,
because it helps me also think of new content ideas. And
mm,
I think I also get into a place where I start to go a little, my brain is too full with different ways of communicating that I now have to take a little bit of a break from that. So now a bit more into the escapism books. Love a good
mm,
thriller.
yeah,
I just started Creativity Inc., which is about Pixar.
mhm,
So that should be a
yeah,
really nice book to read. Yeah.
yeah, perfect. Love it.
Mhm.
Um, let me see. Mm, 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 mm. When it comes to creativity, um, where do you typically like draw inspiration from? Is it more from your own experiences? Is it from reading books and stuff like you mentioned, or like where do you kind of typically draw that the inspiration insight from?
When I started drawing, as I was mentioning, it was always about my life. So it was really
Mm,
my journal.
mm,
And so there was always inspiration, because I think that when I was doing that, I had learned how to take something that was maybe pretty simple or not super extraordinary, and
mhm,
turn it into something that was funny or relatable for everyone.
mm,
So that was a skill that I think when I started drawing, I drew a cartoon every single day for a year at
Mm.
least. And so that was kind of a skill that you learned, is how to think differently. Like you were
Yeah.
saying about creativity, how to turn something upside down or switch it
Yeah.
around and reframe it in different ways to create a lot of different cartoons, but all stemming from
Mhm.
my own life. And then I think along the way, I started to do more self work for myself,
Mm.
and also how I approach relationships or how I think about shame and communication. And so I
Yeah.
started to draw about the things that I was learning. For instance, of course, a big one is about attachment theory. So I draw a
Mhm.
lot about that, because that was a book that changed my life and how
Mm.
I enter into situations or into relationships.
Mm.
And then I'm also inspired by stories. So people that follow me, the cool dancers, send me stories all the time. So lots of different inspiration from them. Every Sunday, I do. It's called Your Story Sunday, which
Mm.
if you've been around for a long time, then you'll have seen and probably also shared with. But where each Sunday I ask a question to the community, and they share their own responses, and those I also incorporate into my drawing as well. Yeah, so it's kind of evolved. So I wouldn't say that it's my diary anymore, although a lot of the things, still have happened to me, or are still situations that I've been in, but maybe the way I think about them now or the way I portray them now is written from a different point of view than how it
Mm.
actually happened in real life.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Um, when you first started and it was this journal, was it very like did you have it labeled as like this is Jessica Stahl's art, or was it like kind of a I don't say like almost like a side account that you knew about that your friends didn't know about that was like all art, or was it very clear like oh wow this is you were just kind of putting yourself out there like that immediately?
Totally putting myself out there. I think it said
Wow.
my diary and doodles. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah, yeah, really totally open. But I've never really been insecure about the thoughts that I have, or
Hmm.
I'm probably an oversharer. I am an oversharer anyways.
Hmm.
And that's probably why I got called most awkward in high school, or got nominated as most awkward in high school, because I think I just said things that I thought, or asked questions to people that I thought, and maybe they didn't, maybe they felt awkward by the questions I was asking. But now I think I'm kind of the same as I was back then in terms
Yeah.
of, yeah, the types of things that I share or talk about.
Mm. Yeah. Cool. Did you grow up religious at all?
I'm Jewish, so I'm actually in
Okay.
town for Passover.
Oh wow, cool.
And so I grew up Jewish, I guess conservative. And I, yes, where am I going with this?
Well, I have a follow-up question to that. And
Okay.
the reason that I'm asking is because kind of circling back around to shame,
Mm,
I know that for me, like I would say the vast majority of the shame that I have dealt with comes from being raised a very conservative Christian,
mm,
and unpacking a lot of that mixed with like my dad also sexually abused with my sisters, so like I had this kind of like a lot of stuff just all around sexuality, and being safe to be myself and all of these different things. So I'm curious, like how I don't know within the Jewish community that you were raised in, like was shame kind of thrust from religion in that end point, or was it not a big part of it? Or I'm curious of how it related with you in that end.
I don't know if growing up Jewish really related so much with how I felt about shame.
Hmm.
Um, that said, I grew up in a very open household
Hmm.
where, my parents are big followers of my account. My
Hmm.
grandmother taught me to curse when I was a kid. My
That's awesome.
mom found out I was having sex, and she got really mad at me because I snuck a boy upstairs.
Mm.
But she gave me money to buy a vibrator that same day. So,
Mm.
so
Wow.
I guess I was really fortunate to grow up, because not so many people do, but in a house that was really sex positive,
Hmm.
and that I always felt open enough to talk about it with. That
Mm.
said, that could just be because, as I said, I will talk about it anyways. So I think I was maybe also lucky that my parents were open enough to talk about it back with me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a really cool thing to hear that of like your mom's reaction to that experience. I mean, I can imagine any parent, um, whether you had a boy upstairs or not, it's probably more the sneaking that is like even the worst part of it, right?
Yeah,
But for her to have
absolutely.
that, yeah, and for her to have that response where she's like, okay, I'm gonna like you're obviously coming in your sexuality. Let's like deal with it. I'm going to support you through it. Versus a lot of people would just be like, thrown out of the house, or they would be just yelled at, or they're be ashamed of their daughter, or like whatever the thing is. So for you to be like, you know, you have that experience. There's maybe some embarrassment and whatever, but then to be held and supported, I could have imagined like totally gave you a different sort of relationship to that experience than somebody else might have.
1,000%. I think I remember coming home after I had gotten caught, and then it was the next day, and I came home, and my mom was sitting on the porch swing, and we were talking. And she definitely was most angry at the fact that I had brought a boy upstairs because she said that, and I said, "Well, where do you want me to have sex then? Where's my virginity also? Where do you want me to have sex then?" And she goes, "I don't know. Get creative." It was nice that it was a really funny conversation in the end, and
uh,
I was really afraid though because I definitely was somebody who grew up afraid of disappointing your
mm,
parents, so I was always quite in line.
mm.
But it was a fun and very memorable and supportive conversation in the end.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope that I don't know if you have already, but I hope that you create a comic of that conversation
Oh
because it
my
was
gosh,
pretty hilarious. Uh,
absolutely. Every Mother's Day, I think I
oh
reshare
yeah,
the
that's
image of the porch swing.
that is great. That's a special mom you have for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Very cool. Um, I guess kind of leading into something we talked about before the podcast was you had mentioned like relationship dynamics and how over the last like several years you started to kind of make a shift in that regard. How did you maybe see relationships 5 6 years ago versus how you kind of see them now?
Oh, well, when I moved to the Netherlands, that was 7 years ago. I just had a breakup with my boyfriend, and I say it was out of the blue because at the
Mm,
time it was out of the blue. But of course, upon reflection, I can see that it was a relationship where, well, it was a classic anxious avoidant relationship. It was a classic case of me always chasing this man,
mm,
and in doing so becoming not a very attractive version of myself, and not taking my own responsibility in a relationship to realize, hey, do I actually like this?
mm,
Um, and if not, then maybe I can leave. And I think that's due to a lot of insecurities that I had.
mm,
A few years ago, I went to a different coach, and at one point she said, "Why don't you think you're worthy of love?" And I
mm,
said, "Well, of course I think I'm worthy of love." And she said, "No, I don't think you do, because if you did, you wouldn't go after these people who don't give it to you, or who don't want
mm,
to give it to you." And that really stuck with me. And so did learning about attachment theory, and how, you know, I don't think I ever understood how to communicate securely. I think I
mm,
never understood what that felt like or what that looked like. I don't think I ever understood that it's not necessarily whether or not somebody likes you or not, but it's actually maybe the dynamic between two people. And is
mm,
that the best for you? And are you going to become the best for each other in that dynamic?
mm,
And these were all things that helped me become more confident in how I'm dating now, and in the more recent relationships that I've had. And so I really changed, and you're also a bit better able to take things less personally, I think,
mm,
because you become more curious. If somebody pushes you away, instead of becoming smaller, maybe you ask, like, hey, when you did this, I didn't love it. Like, where is it coming from? And I
yeah.
don't know. I've also gotten once the guy, I said that to somebody because he did say something, and I think I questioned it, and he said, "Oh, you're being such a girl about it." And
Mm,
first of all, fucked up thing to say.
Yeah.
But second of all, I later said to him, you spoke in a way that was not to bring us closer, but to push us apart. And I'm wondering where that came from. It didn't make me feel good. I'm wondering why you did that and if it was a conscious choice to do that. And I think he ended up saying, oh, I think maybe subconsciously, I'm not sure where this is going. And so maybe I was doing it to push you away. When maybe before I would have been like, oh, I'm being so dramatic, and
Mm.
I'll make myself smaller to hopefully hold on to this person who is
Yeah.
actually trying to push me away. And yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, a lot of what I heard from that, especially the last conversation, is it's like the tools that you have learned, those like communication skills and understanding attachment styles, giving you the opportunity to turn those spaces that maybe just felt painful, and you either were like, oh, I have to leave or I have to cling on to this person, and instead you were able to turn it into a conversation that led to much more clarity. It sounds like either way, whether it was something to move forward or towards, or you're going to be like, hey, yeah, we are going to live in the kind of ambivalent unknown. But you're able to like actually get value from that experience versus it just being like, well, fuck, what do I do now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a friend at the time had to talk to me about that as well, because I think my first initial reaction was he's being avoidant or he shouldn't say this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm only dating secure people now. And I think a
Mm-hmm.
friend said, well, maybe just ask him. And then I'm really glad she said that because it's so true. I mean, it didn't change the outcome of where we ended, but it did help with the understanding of it. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, that's something that I've more recently come to a realization with, which I can't remember the name of the creator right now, but had posted something about how she had started to learn to love and appreciate avoidance in her life, rather than seeing them as like, oh, you're an avoidant. Because I'm much more of an anxious leaning
Mhm.
attachment style too. And so I would kind of have that same experience, and to be like, oh, like understand that like this person's like needs are different and their experience of what things are on are different, and for me to honor and respect that versus making that about me or them being a bad person or whatever it been is like a big part of that growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not always easy to do. I mean,
No.
especially when you're just starting to date somebody. And that's something I always experience too. A first date. After a first date, I love hey, I had a great time text. And can I see you next week? That is my
Hmm.
favorite text to get. And it I I get so much rest from it. I feel like I can step into my feminine energy. I feel
Mm,
so relaxed. So okay,
mm,
we can either chit chat in between or doesn't matter. I know I'm seeing you again. And I find
mhm,
that if I don't get that validation right after the first date, like immediately, that I still will slip back into weird behaviors or weird thinking
mhm.
patterns.
Yeah.
And when in reality, some people process slower or
Mhm,
not everyone will communicate in the way that you want them to. And so giving people that grace and staying calm in the in betweens of that, I think that's also continuous learning for me.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree. I think you know, developing that ability to learn like the needs that I have or that you have as like each individual person is like this, ongoing process. And it's so I found like so important. Like I in this kind of newer relationship that I'm in, um, I have realized that like I have a really, really deep need for clarity. Like I don't need to be you communicating to me like 30,000 times. I love communication. I love being in touch, and like I'm very word oriented. I love banter and play and like all that kind of stuff through text messaging and that kind of thing. And like if you're not there, that's okay. I just want to know. Like I just want to know, like you don't have space. Great, cool. Let me know so that I'm there. Otherwise, I just feel this awkward tension of like, do I need to do something different? Are you mad at me? I get all, and I'll like, my brain will just fill in the gaps and create this crazy narrative. And it's just like, if you just tell me what it is that you want or don't want, my brain can relax and I can go just do whatever. But if
Yeah.
I don't have that, it's like really anxiety producing for me.
Yeah, and I think that's a great word you use because I say communication a lot, but I like what you said about clarity because indeed, it's not necessarily, I actually don't need to talk to anyone in between seeing them. As
Hmm.
long as as long as it's been communicated that I will see them. So it is definitely a great word, clarity. Also why I like the Dutch directness.
Yeah, well, that's I guess a great like leaning in point. Like how I mean, I guess you've been there for 7 years, so maybe you forgot, but maybe not. Like how is dating in the Netherlands compared to like dating in the United States?
Well, I have to say, I don't think I very much dated in the United States. I
Mm,
think I left before I was on the apps. So I don't think I had an experience of dating.
mm,
But what I do notice is that there are way more women than men in Amsterdam. So that also
mm,
creates a culture where it's a bit unbalanced.
mm,
Um, the Dutch culture, the going out culture is very different. So when you go to a bar, you're not there to pick up people. You're really there. People go with their group of friends and they stay with their group of friends the entire night and then they leave with their group of friends.
mm,
So even body language at a bar is really difficult to start a conversation with somebody because everyone's facing really straight on at the bar. There's no way to even, nobody's standing kind of a little bit open that you could even strike up a
mm,
conversation as something simple as, what are you ordering? So that was a pretty hard culture shock. So,
mm,
and something I don't love about living there, I have to say. But I think that I really do appreciate the Dutch directness. Of course, not every single Dutch person is direct, but
mhm,
I think I like, again, to that clarity thing, knowing where I stand. One thing I will also never get over, and I'm sure it's similar, maybe it's similar here with Venmo, is it's called the Dutch Tikkie. So it's a similar payment to Venmo, kind of.
mhm.
Um, but when you go on a date and they say, "Oh, well, I'll just take you later," I hate that. I hate being said. Honestly, I find it okay to split a bill. I'm fine with
Mhm.
it. Um, but I hate getting invoiced after a date. I don't want an
Yeah,
invoice,
that
and I don't want to invoice you. In a
yeah.
romantic setting, I don't think it's nice. Hey, I had a great time on the date. Here's your bill for half of it.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy. Also, I'm like, now you look like you're getting this date when actually we're splitting the date, you know? So,
Yeah, that is a weird experience. I can imagine that feeling of just being like, of yeah, like you said, like being invoiced for the date afterwards and being like, did I just pay for a service or did we have a mutual connection? What just happened there?
yeah, now, I mean, plenty of Dutch people don't mind that. I have girlfriends that are like, yeah, well, I do it with my friends and I do it on my dates. It's fine, but I hate it.
Yeah.
I will never get
Yeah,
over that.
yeah. I do not
Yeah.
think I would like that either. Um, what about like with regards to I don't know like the relationships between like you said you didn't necessarily date as much in the United States, but even just like the I'm curious about the relationships that are or the differences in the relationship between maybe men and women in the Netherlands compared to how it is in the States, and then around like sexuality in the Netherlands compared to the United States.
Absolutely. Good question. A big difference is that marriage is way less common in the Netherlands than it is in the United States. So many people, I've only been to one wedding in the Netherlands in
Mm,
comparison to most of my friends in the United States are married. And most of the time, it is the goal to find your partner that you're going to get married to and then you'll have kids with.
hmm
And in the Netherlands, a majority of people, well, I don't know the percentages of it, but don't get married. They do maybe have a registered partnership and then they could have kids together, but they
mm,
will never get married. And
mm.
that's way, way more common there. That was a big
That's
difference.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What is the is there a like a legal difference there between like a domestic partnership and a marriage there? Like why is it just they don't like the kind of religious connection or like the kind of older thinking? Like what's the idea or um I guess my question is why? Why domestic partnership versus marriage? Like what's your take on that at least?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I think I believe the only difference is that one has to be, what is it, divorced by like court or by, an institute, and I think a legal partnership can just be done,
Mm,
canceled, broken, the two of you. I don't think it needs to involve a greater thing. Um,
mm,
but I think also what I hear often is they don't love the institution of marriage, that it's a lot of money for a wedding, so they just want to have a
mm.
party. Now, one thing I did learn more recently is that a Dutch wedding is very different from a wedding here.
Oh, wow.
So no shade to the Dutch weddings or Dutch, any of our Dutch listeners, but it is. I've had so many conversations with people who said, "Oh, I don't want a wedding. I just want a party." And I'm like, "A wedding? You want a wedding?" And they're like, "No, a party." I'm thinking, "A
Oh,
wedding? I go to weddings. They're a party. You
yeah.
have you seen it? Have you seen a movie? It's like of course, a religious wedding is different, but just a a basic wedding is the length of the movie you saw, and then you're drinking and partying. That is
Yep.
not a
Yep.
Dutch wedding. It is about a, a multi-hour experience of speeches, wedding, cake cutting, uh, uh, boral, which is a little happy hour, a dinner, and then you walk into a rager where your grandma probably isn't going to go to. So it's really
Mm,
funny that I finally went to one and I was like, oh, yes, I understand. You want a party. You don't want a wedding. So maybe that's also a reason why, because you're, because it is the ones I've been to, the first part of the day is really more formal, at least
yeah.
from the one wedding I went to. So
Yeah.
don't DM me. Don't get in my DMs.
That is so funny. Um, so I know one of the things that you're working on in Amsterdam right now is some of this like kind of street art, like guerrilla artwork that you're doing and campaigns that you're working on. You did one, I believe, last year, right? And then it sounds like you're prepping one for again. How did you get involved with sort of the street art aspect of things?
I think that I love things that are in my control.
Mm,
So um, I last year I was inspired to do something a bit different. I love my cartoons, but I wanted to do something a bit more disruptive and kind of lean a bit more into my creative director campaign side of things that I also bring to brands or bring to companies, and to do that for myself. And I saw an opportunity the first time with King's Day, which is the Dutch national holiday for the king's birthday,
mm,
to hijack a moment that's meant to be all about the king and make it all about the queen, and to tap more into a broader societal topic. So, for instance, in this example, for helping to close the orgasm gap.
mm,
And what I loved about this, and what was probably the most amazing experience, was I got such a high from the fear of getting in trouble and getting caught,
mm,
but also the fact that through cartoons you can distill complicated subjects into really simple uh, communications. And also, I think there's something about the form of my cartoons and the tone of voice with them is that it makes it really approachable to different audiences. So
mm,
when I want to create change with the orgasm gap, of course, I want women behind that as well. But you also want to get men thinking, and you also want to get
mm.
men talking. And my account is
Yeah.
mostly women. And so by
Mm,
going into the streets, you also reach a way broader target audience that maybe would never have seen your work. And so that's really cool. And putting your work out there just totally takes on a its own world, because you're putting it out there for people to experience in real life and react to in real life, the good, the bad. And it
mm,
was really a cool thing. This one in particular took off throughout the whole city, so it went completely viral, and people were taking photos of the artwork and texting about the artwork, and it was just the coolest thing to see.
very cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of why I'm drawn to a lot of your stuff. Like I've always been like very attracted to like stronger, like independent women, like who are more comfortable, I think, with their sexuality because like that has been like a struggle point for me. So it's like, and especially like things around sex, like you're talking about shame, like, you know, you can be in one room and talk about sex super openly and comfortably, and everybody's laughing and having a good time and whatever, and you can go into another room and like mention the word sex and people like freeze and like break down and cry. And so it's like, it's for me, especially as a guy, it's been such a weird, I don't know, experience of figuring out like, how do I like learn how to be comfortable with myself and my sexuality, like kind of learning where or which people are comfortable. How do I like, talk about this stuff in a way where I'm really comfortable with it, but somebody else might not be.
Absolutely. And I think between, I think as women, one thing that we have to our benefit is that we talk more openly, I think, with our female friends
Mm-hmm.
than men do with their guy friends. And
Oh yeah.
that is a really, really difficult cycle to break. And to feel that camaraderie and safe space to communicate about your
Mm-hmm.
sexuality or your sex life or your relationships. um, yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for men that are looking for places to become more comfortable speaking about it, because I think it's, there's still a long way to go.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree, and I think that that's like, even the fact that you have that understanding is huge, because I think one of the challenges that I have seen, because I'm like, I don't know if this comes from like the fact that my parents just like fought a ton, but like I am like kind of in the background of my mind always obsessed with like, how do we like kind of just heal these relationships between men and women kind of on this like collective global stage, because there's a lot of stuff where it's like men are still complaining about women about these very vague things, and women are complaining about men. And what I've always believed, again, probably from listening to my parents fight, is often that like most fights are misunderstandings. Like 99% of them, at least, right? It's some sort of a gap in communication and understanding that creates that thing. And to the point you just made around like men not having those communities, in my experience, a lot of women don't realize that. It's like they have this assumption, because they have this experience of like, oh well, with my women friends we all talk about these things, that there's an
Mm-hmm.
assumption that like men are always talking about these things. Like I always remember that women would, I would talk to some woman, she's like, well, like all you men are probably talking about like our bodies and like the like what it's like to sleep with us and all that stuff, and we were like, I've never heard that conversation from a guy. So it was creating that space where there actually is like that vulnerability, and I think to realize the differences in sort of the guy communities and the women communities that kind of exist. Like, even I was talking to a friend, and she was talking about how cool it is for her to that she loves going to like the women's bathrooms. And I was like, why? And she was like, well, every time you go in there, all the women are pumping you up and they're like, yeah, you look hot, you look great, here's a little thing for your makeup, all this stuff. And I was like, that doesn't exist for guys. Like none of us are getting like pumped up, because we have probably a lot of like just like homophobia ultimately, right? It's like, oh, like you're not giving random guys a compliment because like that, like there's all this fear and
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, right? But it's keeping us from like actually finding that level of self-empowerment that I think a lot of us, at least for me, that I have definitely had like jealousy of, from that I see in women, because it's like, wow, you're so
Yeah,
fully expressed and I'm over here being trying to fit into this archetype of whatever the heck a man is supposed to be.
absolutely. I mean, the women's bathroom is probably my favorite place on earth. I accidentally
Awesome.
took too many drugs, um, and it was kind of my first experience with psychedelic that I didn't know was going to be psychedelic. And
Mm.
I spent the entire party in the women's bathroom.
Wow.
I had the best time.
There's another secret rave inside of the girls' bathroom.
Yes, it was the best place. I told everybody about the women's bathroom. I told everyone how to go, and that it was
uh, that is
just
awesome.
because the energy is, to your point, amazing there. And
Yeah.
and yet for some reason, for all that we talk about these things, still we have so much shame. So I don't know if
Hmm.
it's that we're not talking about the right things, or that yeah, so it's really interesting.
Yeah. I think, I mean, from my own take, and I would love to hear what you think about this. I think what would what's going to help resolve a lot more of those shames is like more dialogues, in a lot of ways almost like the ones that you and I are having right now, where it's like men and women are talking about these things, because I think talking with our own groups, I think that's very important. I think it builds a lot of security and foundation. And to go beyond that and be like, hey, like what is it like to be a woman? Like, what is it like to do that? And what are the things that you deal with? How do you deal with those insecurities? And it takes a lot of personal work to have those conversations in the first place. But I think the way that we get there to really kind of fully eradicate shame is going from the places where we know we're safe to stepping out a little bit and to be like, okay, well, what's it like to be a little bit risky in the start, and understand what the other person is like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, or else we're kind of in our own echo chambers.
Hmm.
And um, absolutely, I think also one of the biggest things now is how do we? I don't know if it's my role to play. I do think that I'm really here to empower women and to
Hmm.
also help men kind of uh, yeah, understand our inner thinking as well. But one of the
Yeah.
biggest things I really see is that as women get more confident or self-expressive, is that we also need to help men
Hmm.
understand how to handle these women that are
Hmm.
more fully expressing themselves now in a way that they weren't before, and how
Hmm.
can we be there to support men in their journey to create balance between these two.
Yeah, well, like so I will give you my theory on that. I think, and if I can almost push back an idea, I think part of the challenge is that through the sort of the unconditioning of patriarchal stuff, right? It's like we can uncondition certain things, but then we kind of leave certain old remnants intact. So, for like example, right, the phrase that you use of just like, how do we teach men how to handle women, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like sort of the guy's responsibility to, like, I don't know, like, be in charge of this thing, and do that versus like, and I think that this is very true. And I can speak from really my own experience. I don't know if every other guy relates to this, but I can speak to a lot of envy that I would have over women, because a lot of the advice that I would see given to women in sort of the personal growth space was, be yourself, right? Be this fully expressed human being of whoever you are, like whatever kind of dress you want to wear. So like I can speak from my own experience that like I would look at women's let's say personal growth advice or relationship advice, and a lot of it was like, just be who you are, like express yourself however you are, whether it's wearing shorts or jeans or a dress, or you want to western or black, or like, it was always about like this, like finding out who you were and expressing that fully. And all of the advice, again, that at least I saw in my thing as a guy was like, you need to be more like this, you needed to be like that, and you needed to hold space, you needed to have a more penetrating energy, you needed to, and it was all of this stuff around, even though it was like sort of this idea of breaking free from these ideas, it was like it was still trying to like live up to this archetype. And the thing about an archetype is you can't ever live up to it because it's not real, right? It's not an actual human being. It doesn't have all these complex features and flaws. And I think that still teaches men to try to live up to something that is ultimately impossible, and creates all of this, honestly, shame, because it's like you're trying to do something that you physically cannot do, rather than figuring out who you are, who I am, and then live from that. And in the same way, find the women or whatever it is that you're looking for who are drawn to that human being. And I think we ultimately, sadly, miss out on a lot of great relationships and people because that language hasn't shifted yet. And I think it's starting to. I think we're seeing kind of more and more breaking free of that, but I think we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting what you're saying, and maybe it's also how when these two groups learn to fully express themselves, they can uh, yeah, find the right person, or yeah, because maybe what I'm thinking is, if as I think about it, very specific instance, for instance, in the bedroom,
Hmm.
is I think for a long time women never were able to communicate what they want or what they like, and in the bedroom, and still struggle so much. But I also think that if you do communicate what you want, that some men are not used to hearing that, and can
Hmm.
also close down probably, or handle in very different ways. So it's also
Hmm.
figuring out how to bridge that gap together, so
Totally.
that to grow, I guess, yeah, you have to change the whole way two people think and approach intimacy, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I 100% agree, and it's funny because I found the opposite to be true as well, where I can be with a woman and I can be like, "What do you like?" And she's like, "I don't know," or doesn't have the ability to communicate, right? Or um, because it's so shocking for her to have that type of experience.
1,000%. I think this is probably way more common than than the other way around. Absolutely. Or to say, "Oh, what I just want you to have enjoy," or whatever
Yeah,
you like. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And for me, like at least like my sexual style is like I'm very much like a giver. I feel like it's probably more challenging for me to receive stuff, and I like all I want is like to know how to make like the other person happy. Like that's actually what brings me joy. So when somebody's like, "Oh, well, just do what you want," I'm like, I don't know what that means in this like circumstance because it's like what I want is to make sure that you feel really happy. Um, and so it's yeah, it's a funny dynamic. I had a similar kind of thing where with actually some women friends where I was, working with them, and I always like to ask around consent. It's like if it's okay to talk around about sexual topics or kink,
Mhm,
those types of things, because some people, like we kind of mentioned earlier, aren't always comfortable with that. And so I had asked a friend, and we would have these kind of like little dialogues, and I would kind of always ask every time I bring it up. And then we had this kind of like clashing point where she was like, I don't ever feel comfortable when you're telling me these things. And I was like, why have you been telling me this whole time that you are then? Right. And it was like her realization that she
mhm,
like never actually felt like she could, even though I was asking, never actually
mhm.
felt like she could tell a guy that she had certain boundaries. And, she had learned that she could now. And so that's something that like we kind of like worked through in our relationship. And also just that's been a growth point for her and also for me to kind of pay attention for kind of other signals. But it was just so eye opening of just how much like our own conditioning, even if we are using the right tools, still can prevent us from like living this kind of life that we want to be living and living healthily.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's just a constant challenge for people, and that's
Hmm.
why communicating and talking about things or being curious about why people are reacting the way they are or
Hmm.
where something is coming from is instrumental in breaking this down, and forming a deeper bond with one another.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. Um, was there a like specific area of communication for you that was initially really, really challenging that now you feel like a lot of like I don't know power and ownership and skill over?
I think the biggest thing in communication that I have learned or have worked on is that a lot of the communication we avoid is because we don't want to know the answer or we
Mm-hmm.
don't want to face the outcome of what that might be. And so I think the biggest takeaway that I've learned through working on my own self-worth and, you know, values about what I value out of a relationship or out of a friendship or out of somebody in my life is, to face those fears, because the outcome will be either you are brought closer, which is amazing, and you would never have had that moment to bring you closer without these conversations, or it will maybe drive you further apart. But at least again, you'll have clarity and can work with that information. I think that in my last relationship, we communicated really well. So when we ended up breaking up, it wasn't a surprise to anyone because you talk about all the things that are working or are not working, or your needs or their needs. And instead of somebody doing all that internal work by themselves and making a decision for two people, without giving it a fighting chance, communicating together, you can both know that you're at least doing your best, and you're actively choosing to engage in these conversations for the betterment of the relationship. And I think that's been a really great development. It's something I'm way more confident in. Of course, how to approach these conversations, I still find difficult, and the right way to bring them up, or the right setting, or how to frame them. But the fear of having the conversation and the desire to communicate about things has totally transformed.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing all that.
You're welcome.
Um,
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice. Growth is
yeah,
nice.
yeah. No, it is. It is really nice when you got to get to the other, particularly when you get to the other side of it. Growth itself can sometimes be painful. Sometimes it can be pleasurable too. But it's definitely nice once you're kind of like in that space and for lack of a better phrase, and you start to develop that actual like secure or attachment style, right? And being able to be like, okay, cool, I can accept this or not, deal with the reality versus trying to like just cling on to something that maybe isn't there.
Yeah, yeah. You're clinging on to a reality that isn't reality because it's just something you made up in your head and hasn't been
Yeah,
verified. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Very cool. Um, Oh, that would be something that you just did. So, speaking of shame and self-expression and all of these different things, I love how engaged you are, by the way, right now, because you're like full on like leaning in, and it's like really cool to see. Because I'm like, okay, cool. She's like really in this conversation, which has been fun.
Also,
Uh,
sorry if
you,
I'll lean back. It's because I I messed up my back, so I'm also so if I'm leaning away, it's just because I'm trying to crack my back on the chair.
no, no, you're all good. Yeah, movement is fine. Um, so one of the things that you did recently was you did this nude photo shoot, which you shared a little bit of through your email letter. Uh, what inspired this photo shoot, and then why did you choose to ultimately like share this with people when you didn't have
Good. Yeah. I forgot I did that and I forgot about oh my gosh, my brain is like miles ahead. Yeah, so last year I think 2 years ago I w- thought about honestly, I watched a TV series of Schitt's Creek,
to?
and it's my favorite show. And Moira Rose, there was a whole episode where Moira Rose thought her nudes were leaked on the internet, and she
Hmm.
spends the whole episode trying to find her nudes on the internet, and from when she was younger, only to find out that her nudes it was fake news. Her nudes weren't leaked on the internet, and she just stares wistfully out the window, and I think she says something like, "But if my nudes aren't on the internet, like who will see them or or something like that." And it just made me think when I am the age of Moira Rose or older or even 3 years from now, I would love to have photos of myself now because I think that we are always super critical of our bodies and yeah, more critical than anyone else will be, and way less gracious than anyone else will be for another's body, and
Hmm.
and we don't appreciate them enough. And
Hmm.
I wish, looking back now, I'm like, oh, I should have done it when I was younger because it was such an empowering experience. It was something I knew that I wanted to do just for myself. I chose a photographer with, I guess, who has more of a female gaze aesthetic. So I fell in love with the photographer's work, and it was just the best time ever, the best weekend ever. And I was really nervous before going into it, but it was such a cool experience. You're just, the at least my photographer made me feel super safe. They were, in my perspective, focused on the lighting and the angles and the compositions and not really about my body. And it just allowed me to have so much fun. And
Hmm.
when else are you in front of a camera and just taking direction and
Hmm.
feeling totally free? So
Yeah.
even the experience by itself would have been enough.
Hmm.
I would pay for just the experience enough without even getting the photos because
Wow.
it was that awesome. And I think
Hmm.
anyone should try it once in their life.
Wow.
And why I chose to share it with the world, well, was because I know people that are follow me are interested in doing it themselves, but I also think people don't really think about nude photo shoots in the same way. For
Hmm.
me, it was really a story about empowerment and finding new ways to appreciate your body and also just doing something for yourself.
Hmm.
And I originally wrote the whole article and newsletter without any nudes in the article,
Hmm.
and then a friend said to me, "That's not really vanilla cool dance of you." And I took a long time to think about that. So I think she said that to me in August, and I didn't release the newsletter until March, I believe, or early March. So that was about 6 months of not constant thinking about it, but making a conscious decision to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I had to work through my own shame about. And I think I realized that the shame was actually based on what I thought society would say about it, or what. So, society tells you not to show these things. When
Mm-hmm.
I go to the naked spa in Amsterdam all the time now,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just bodies, and it's a very anthropological experience. Nothing
Yeah.
feels very sexual. In fact, even a bathing suit feels more sexual than just the naked body. And
Mm-hmm.
so I thought, if I'm going to share this with the world and encourage people to do it and to celebrate their bodies, that I should just go all in. And I'm really proud of how the photos came out, and
Yeah.
they have my scars, and
Mm.
and um, I love them. So why not share them?
It's beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing them. I think it's really cool, and it's funny. It reminds me of what you kind of initially started talking about with shame and vanilla cool dance, and like this idea of like reclaiming your story, right? And there's this kind of ironic aspect of like, the fear of this character's nudes ending up on the internet versus you being like, well, I'm just going to put them on the internet, and now they're there. And I've kind of taken
Yeah.
charge of that aspect versus kind of living in the fear of what if my nudes ever end up on the internet? We're like, well,
Oh my
they're already
gosh,
there.
absolutely. I always think about like the people that say, be careful what nudes you send to your boyfriend or to this person, because they could leak them. And okay, I say this with a grain of salt, because I don't think, I mean, this is a horror story, and nobody should
Mm-hmm.
ever have to go through this violation of somebody leaking their
Mm-hmm.
nudes.
Yeah.
But I'm over here thinking those were that was like the favorited nude I took, like with careful lighting and composition, and I look great in that nude. I don't want if somebody broke into my cloud and got all the outtakes. That's the again. Nobody should do this.
Right.
It's horrific, and I don't want to at all diminish if that has ever happened to
Yeah.
somebody. Um, but God, I don't want anyone to get those outtakes. I want,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want responsibility for the ones on the internet. I want to look
Yeah.
very proud of them. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I have this, like just, it's just a silly theory really, but like the silly theory that, like basically from Gen Z on, like no political people will ever be able to be blackmailed because everybody will have nude photos of each other. And it's just like, it just doesn't matter. And at that point, it's just like, okay, like everybody's like stuff is just like out there. So who cares at that point?
Yeah, and I guess
Um,
I'm lucky. I mean, people can lose their
mhm.
jobs over this,
Yeah.
and of things being leaked or being unsupported. And I always worked in really supportive settings, and
Mm.
um, yeah, so it helps to have a lot of support around you.
Yeah, yeah. That's actually brings up a good question that makes me think of is, one of the things that I have over the last few years, like had to be reminded of and has been like something that I kind of like work to figure out how to reconcile is, um, I often I think sometimes we can live in our own bubble and not necessarily in a bad thing in this like space where it's like, oh, it's comfortable to talk about sex in this very like fun and freeing way and go to nude spas or like these different parts of ourselves where it's like, oh, this is like who I am, expression. And then it's like it's weird to also simultaneously be in a place where like, yeah, you're right, somebody if they did the same thing could completely lose their job or be ostracized by their community or um thrown in jail in some places, right? And it's so bizarre, and I'm curious, like, how do you kind of like personally like reconcile with these like this kind of large complex world that we have where on one place we can have so much freedom, and in some other part of the world it's just like the exact opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the community, the vanilla dance community is quite global. So there's people
Hmm.
from all over the world that are in places where arranged marriages are the norms, or you even talking about abortion. Well, of course, now we live in the States. It's also dependent,
Yeah.
where you know that it's so different. Or for instance, the male female dynamics, communicating what you want in the bedroom and expecting
Mhm.
to be at all listened to is not at all a topic of conversation,
Mm.
because the whole society there is not, open to that. That's not where the society's at. So I think that can be difficult. Of course, I think I'm extremely privileged in my ability to express myself the way I do, and my ability to move to a new country, my ability to do a lot of different things. I'm really inspired that they follow me, and I just hope that it's a way for them to even bring a small amount of confidence back into their life, no matter where they are or where their society is. And to at least take comfort in knowing that other people are experiencing the same things. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like, I'm guessing, through Vanilla Cool Dance, like you'll have some of these people who are maybe in arranged marriages that they don't want to be in, or just in these other parts of the world, having these conversations with you. What have you kind of learned from, I don't say, talking to women across the world who maybe are in some of these like more conservative or really challenging places to find that self expression?
Well, I think that empathy is has to be at the heart of everything, because
Mm.
you cannot tell somebody who is living in a totally different world than you to just tell their man what they think, and then
Mm.
if it's not what they want, to leave. I mean, that's not a realistic conversation to have, and that doesn't help
Yeah.
anyone feel good about themselves. So
Yeah.
I think it's also, of course, what I put publicly at is my point of view and how I want to lead my life. But if I get a DM, or if somebody's writing to me, I think always approaching it and trying to meet them with where they're at, and helping see what do they genuinely want. Do they genuinely want something to change or not? And being empathetic, and to, yeah, where they're at and what could possibly help them reflect, or a small change to help, improve their relationship or their confidence within themselves.
Mm. That's very cool. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah, it's really nice. I feel really blessed that people share their stories with me,
Mm.
or want my advice on something, or the advice of the community. And
Mm-hmm.
it's can sometimes be heavy, because you sometimes get really tough things to read. But
Yeah.
I think also knowing that I'm not here to necessarily directly help, or sorry, directly fix people, but more
Mm-hmm.
be there to let people share. I think people feel a lot of power just from sharing their story. And in that way alone, hopefully they get something out of the experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think something you spoke to earlier, right? Just feeling that somebody understands you, or that it can relate to your experience in some way, is often so healing. I mean, a lot of what therapy is just that, right? It's like somebody who can understand us, and relate to our experience and will listen to us. I think there's a little bit of sadness that I have that, we somehow got to a point in society, although I guess you could say in a way it's undoing maybe what was more natural, um, but we got to a point in society where we do kind of have to pay somebody to just give us attention, and an
Mm,
ear, and just listen, and I think listening has been a skill that I have consciously worked on for, over a decade. Um, and it is still challenging, and it is for me that also the most rewarding thing. I mean, it's part of why I love doing this podcast, is because I get to just sit down with awesome people like you, and listen to their perspective, their life, their story. And I think for anybody who's listening to this, like, realizing that it's like you don't have to wait for a podcast to have these kinds of conversations, like, and these types of things I got to have while, sitting on, the bus ride home from a music festival, because I took the time to ask and listen and create space and safety for somebody else. And one of the things I've personally found is anybody that I have taken the time to listen to, again, if you listen, if you ask the right questions, um, has an incredible story if they're willing to share it.
Yeah, absolutely. And being patient for people that are not always the most open sharers.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a big, kind of back to communication skills. A big one that I have learned and practiced from a communication workshop put on by my friends John Romanello and Amanda Bucci, called "How to Say the Hard Things." Is um, for me at least, like if I'm ever uncertain of anything, I simply like just ask for permission and consent, and it doesn't have to be always like a sexual thing. It can be simply like, hey, is it cool if I like ask you about this topic that you just mentioned? Or is it cool if I ask you questions even, or is it cool if I talk with you? Are you wanting to talk right now? Or are you more wanting to just like vibe to the music? Because I could just be annoying and investigative with almost anybody.
Mhm.
Like I'm just so fascinated by people and I always have been. I'm just kind of
Well,
wired
that's
that
a
way.
great thing. That is something I could probably benefit from as well. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna take that into my own repertoire now, my own life.
perfect, perfect. I love it. Um, let's see, We've gone all over the place. This has been a really, really great conversation.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it as well.
Good, good. Um, oh, this is a question. So this is I'm gonna preface this. This is going to be a very vague and broad question, and you might
Okay.
need to take a moment, and that's totally okay. And it's a question that I've asked to a couple other women friends of my life, and it has I love the answers that I get, and I'm very curious as to yours. And that is very simply, what is it like to be a woman?
I think that being a woman is magical. I think the depth of our emotions and intuition and empathy is one of the most beautiful things. I think that we have power beyond all the ability to give birth and go through menstruation. The I think we are so incredibly strong, and that strength is so unfortunately rarely tapped into enough. So I am in constant awe of women and our abilities and our strength. I think that women are constantly struggling to fit into a role that society has pushed onto them. I, I, you know, to have children or to get married, to age with grace, but don't get plastic surgery, to um, have children, but also then do you stay working or not? To what makes a good mom, what makes a good wife, and all of these constraints. What happens if you don't fit the mold? Then
Mhm.
are you a broken woman, not fulfilling their life duty to bear a child? Don't speak up. Don't be too big for a room. Keep your opinions to yourself. So I think there's so much that we have to still work through, and I think that is really a difficult place to be. And
Mhm.
to that I say, we should just say fuck it all and fuck them all, because there's going to be no way to, as a woman, appease society. And so we should just, live for ourselves and be authentic to ourselves, and show our strength and the depth of our femininity, and not be afraid of our masculinity as well, and to be soft and strong, and know when to respect you know both sides of ourselves.
Yeah.
That's I don't know what being a woman means to me. I guess I don't
Awesome.
know.
No, I love it. Yeah, no, I love. Thanks for
And it's
entertaining that
very
question.
difficult.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's I think part of what is um, I don't know, fascinating for me about asking that question is like because of the vagueness, and I think it's like something that you know we live in these. I know our experience of life, and I think sometimes we don't take that question to like just examine that. Like, what is this? What is it like? And I have loved hearing it. I think I shared this earlier, but I've spent probably a lot more of a specific detailed focus over the last year and a half of with all of the women in my life really wanting to understand more about their experience in various situations, or just how they see things or understand things or how they relate to men or like whatever, because it's so often it's like, and maybe this comes from the programming of not feeling comfortable to speak up, but I also think, um, you know, there's a lot of times where women speak up and like men, we really don't listen, and we will just like eschew it. And so then, women's like, well, why am I bother even talking, because there's not a point. um, and the other aspect that I've really learned, and that I work to push back in even in the large scale conversations about men and women, is just how individual each person is. um, because like we can talk about women in sort of this abstract concept, or women are like this or like that, or men are like this or like that. And like I think I asked a woman friend about, what has she like learned about men from the kind of work she does, and she was like, I've just learned that they're all very different. And I love that answer because it's really, really true. And I think the more that we start to work to see like the actual like individual person in front of us versus these kind of snapshot images that we have in our head, the better our life becomes, and the better the world can become as well.
Great. I wish that was my answer. I can only speak on behalf of one woman.
That's very true. Um, yeah,
Great.
yeah. Well, Jessica, this was a absolutely fantastic conversation. Trying to see if there's anything else that we like didn't go over that we should.
Is there a
Um,
fun question to end with?
um, well, I guess okay. I'll ask you the sort of the opposite question in a way, is like what's kind of like the first thing that you think of when you hear the word men?
Ooh, that they're all different. No. What is the first thing I think of when I think of men? Mm, well, now I'm not thinking of the first thing I think of. I probably think of the first thing I think of when I think of men is that I am looking for a man because I am now in a place in my life where I'm really open to a relationship and open to letting somebody into my life. And so I think probably a top of mind thing for me when I think about men is dating at this moment, which in the past it hasn't always been. And to being open to meeting somebody who is, you know, I've lost my train of thought, but
Please
okay,
go
let me
paddle
start
along.
over.
Yeah, sure.
I think the first thing I think about when I think of men, I'm changing my answer. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
yeah. Change it to whatever comes up to you. Yeah.
The first thing I think about when I think of men is maybe in relation to what I'm now looking for when I am dating because I'm now open to a relationship. And I think it's the curiousness and willingness to learn and to also be open to growth and to communicating and to working as a team. And and so that's what I think about when I think of men, because I think
Awesome.
that it would be beautiful if that's what we could expect of everyone, both men and women.
Yeah.
And but it's not necessarily what you can, and so it would be great if to meet somebody like that.
Yeah. Is it okay if I ask some questions about like your, I know, like your relationship desires or style or that kind of thing? Yeah. Are you so are you like, when you talk about like, now I'm open to a relationship, does that mean like you're looking primarily for like like a long-term partner or a life partner of that, a husband, like something of that nature, or like is it just somebody who you can spend more intimate time with? Like what does that look like for
Yeah, I think that for me, I'm looking for a partner,
you?
hopefully a life partner, but
Hmm.
you never know. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Cool. And are you like monogamous? Like, do you like consider like opening like some sort of ethical non-monogamy of some sort, or like how do you kind of relate to that aspect?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I say that a lot. That's a really good question.
A lot of people
Uh,
do that. I ask really good questions. That's why.
yeah, you're You're blowing me away with the questions. I uh, always thought that I would want to be in a monogamous relationship, and I believe that what I want is a monogamous relationship, but to a certain extent that I didn't understand before about myself is that I still want to explore things with my partner. So there's a lot of things I'm interested in, going to kink clubs and into yeah, different I trying different things. I don't know
Mhm.
even what
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is. Be it like a threesome with two men, I would really like to have at one point in
Mhm.
my life. And I'm sure there's a whole list of other things. So I think it's
Yeah.
more, I feel in my heart that I would like to have one partner, but that there's still the ability to explore together.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure what that looks like yet. But
Yeah.
I think that would always involve being engaged with your partner. So
Mhm.
even if it was some sort of um, threesome or watching or something, that
Mhm.
maybe it's always you're being intimate with your partner, or it's a shared experience in a way.
Yeah. So
But
when I'm oh, go ahead. Keep going.
oh no, I was going to say, but a lot of this is hypothetical or
Yeah.
speculation because I haven't actually had it. But instead
Yeah.
of the idea that you have to get these desires out of your way beforehand, I like the idea of kind of figuring them out together. And I
Yeah.
think that in principle, these things are always a conversation, and you never know until you're in an experience. And I think that always something should be able to be vetoed or
Yeah.
stopped at any moment, and to change your mind about something.
Mhm.
But I think these are conversations I never would have had before, and I really like asking people about their sexuality when I
Mhm.
date now. Where are they interested in?
Mhm.
Only women, or where on the spectrum are they lying with
Yeah.
that? I find that really interesting.
Mhm.
How open are they into sexual exploration? I find these
Mhm.
questions more interesting than maybe monogamy or not monogamy. I think I'm still
Mm.
monogamous, but that desire to explore or to continue the open the door into the pleasure journey is really
Yeah.
fascinating to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, kind of what I'm hearing from that is that there's a definitely a strong desire for like that really deep, intimate, especially like on the relational level partnership, but probably a more leaning openish on like sort of the sexual front and the explorative front and being able to like help um, support each other through like, continued exploration.
Yeah. Yeah. And I still am like in doubt with myself in terms of how open that is,
Yeah,
but we'll find out.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure that you've read books and like too. It's like I think it's definitely like you said, like there's that figuring that out aspect where we have the idea of something and then we have the actual experience and learning what that looks like for us, all very individually. I know for myself, like I definitely identify as polyamorous because like that's literally just once I understood that as like an orientation, like my brain and how I understood the world. For me, I definitely crave like that long term partnership. And being with somebody on the relational level. And I think for me, to kind of the similar point that you make, like having those other skills to have those conversations, that continue exploration, in my opinion, is what keeps the relationship um, intact as they change. Because I think one of the things that I have seen, and again, this is not everyone by any means, but like a lot of relationships break down because those two people will change and grow over time, or their desires may shift, or whatever. And ultimately, people can end relationships because they're no longer feeling sexual desire toward each other, or they are no longer, um, or they're craving something that isn't being able to be provided by that partner. And so, for me at least, like I love the opportunity to be able to have conversations and say like, hey, for us, like the most important thing is like us and our us being together and navigating the world together, and the rest of the stuff we can figure out how to get those needs met, regardless of thing. Like it's like I feel like richer, like for kind of the traditional marriage vows, which I actually think if you pay attention to them, even though I know marriage is bashed a lot, like the original marriage vows are very beautiful if they're actually really meant, right? It's like through richer or poorer, through sickness and health, right? Like these, like through ups and downs, like these tragedies and extreme triumphs, we will stay together. And I think that becomes a lot more doable when, if I ended up in the hospital and my, unable to, I don't know, be there sexually or something for my wife anymore, and knowing that she could still get that need met and keep us together versus like, oh, well, now she's like suffering. It's like, I wouldn't want that. And, or I wouldn't want to be left because of that either. Right. I
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think there doesn't have to be, and if for people who choose it or want that, to they some people enjoy the limitation. It's like I very much value the my self expression. I enjoy and love the self expression of others. I think life is meant to be enjoyed fully as much as we
Absolutely.
can. So.
And even if it doesn't come to, you know, um, uh, type of non-monogamous or monogamous, but I get so many submissions of people that don't want don't communicate things that they desire with their partner, and I think that's really really sad. The number of men that
Hmm.
tell me they want to get pegged, but they're really afraid to communicate that to their partner, or the
Hmm.
number of women that write to me that say they think they're bisexual, but they are afraid to communicate that to their partner.
Hmm.
Yeah, I find it really sad for them because I think it's limiting their joy and their pleasure and part of what is really exciting about dating now is that and if you're single now, is that you can start the relationship with this openness from the very beginning, which I think already is so helpful for setting
Hmm.
the groundwork for everything. And I find that I feel really lucky in that you're not kind of
Yeah.
reverse engineering these conversations in a relationship that was maybe started years ago when these things were way less common to talk about openly. It's really
Yeah, yeah,
interesting.
no, I agree. I think we're super blessed to be in a time period where like we can be having these kinds of conversations in a public setting that like everybody can just listen to and hear and talk about, and that I don't probably have to worry about like death threats coming to my house or like whatever it might be. Um, there's enough tolerance and
Yeah.
acceptance for this to be here, and that's really cool. Um, there was something that you had said earlier in that struck a chord with me really well. I think it was about communication. Oh, that's what it was. So yeah, you had talked about like, and I agree. And this is the thing that I think I want to communicate to people in general so often who like when I'll talk about myself being polyamorous, and various people on both poly and monogamous and everything in between can become very defensive about whatever their position is. And frankly, I don't care what
Hmm.
you want to do. Like do you and do the thing that makes you happy. And like the thing is, you can create fully logical reasons for why monogamy is awesome, and you can create fully logical reasons for why the most open thing is awesome, right? It's like there are justified reasons for Bedlam. So it's not coming down to a logical argument. It's coming down to like what you want. And the thing that I would tell and encourage everyone to do, regardless of their relationship style, is to like read these books like Ethical Slut, read these conversation books, like read these designer relationships, because the skill sets that you will have to have conversations that are so much deeper and bring so much depth to the relationships that you just mentioned, right? Where it's like, I know so many people who are in fights over and over again because they haven't had a conversation about what it means to be monogamous with each other. And it can be so assumed of like, oh, well, monogamy obviously means this, and like cheating is XYZ to you. But like to the other person, flirting with that other person at the bar isn't cheating, and to somebody else it is. Somebody else, like kissing is, to somebody else it's not, right? And like there's all these little things. Sometimes porn is, sometimes porn's not. And like just asking those like larger questions to define what it is that these words mean, I think is so critical. And anyone, in almost any profession, I think, would value from these different types of relationship skills and asking these deeper questions that we often just have baked in assumptions around.
Absolutely. The amount that we assume that the other person is on the same page or understands words in the same way as us is, you know, it's it leads that's to so much miscommunication. And I completely agree that what is your definition of these terms? What does it mean to you? Um, and also exploring. I think when with the judgment, it also comes a lot of projection. So when people,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think there's healthy and unhealthy polyamorous relationships. I think there's healthy and unhealthy monogamous relationships. I think there's healthy and
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy open relationships,
Yeah.
and it's very easy to project your belief or your past experience or uh, or or kind of the unhealthy thing that you've seen and assume that's what everything is, and instead of kind of
Mm-hmm.
questioning and really being curious about it, because I think it's really amazing and I get so excited to talk to people that have explored different types of relationships and how it works
Mm-hmm.
and why it works and how do they get energy from that. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just live your life. And if you have a lot of love to give, then yeah, why not share that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel very much the same way. Um, and it makes me also think about what you mentioned earlier with like, maybe guys who want to be pegged, who aren't able to communicate their partner or bisexuality. And there's this, I remember this statistic that I think comes from like, I think the guy's name is like Justin H. Miller. He wrote a book that was all about different like sexual desires and things of that nature. And one of the fascinating things that he found was it was like 10% or like 80% of women's like sort of like women have the desired sexual fantasy of like of sort of seducing a guy, right, and being like the proactive initiator. And like
Mm-hmm.
80% of men, like one of their primary fantasies was like that they would be seduced by a woman, right, or and have this like initiator woman like doing this thing. And yet like both of those things in their sexual expression were very rare, right? And it's this like kind of irony, and I think this has a lot to do with the shame, the societal protections, and all these things that we've talked about today, where it's like there's this thing that both people want,
Mm-hmm.
that if both people just like had a conversation about and talked about, they would both be getting.
Yeah.
But because there is this shame, this fear of just sharing these things or talking about them or not having the skill sets around it, um, they remain as these unfulfilled, tension rigged fantasies instead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also people don't even know what their fantasies are, because
Mm,
I think I never knew I wanted a threesome with two men until I was in a situation where I was like, I would really like a threesome with the two of you. So it's also like being curious about your own pleasure and your own sexuality. And I think it's really cool to dive into that and see where you come out or what you're curious about. And I really like apps like Field App or Pure App, and where you can kind
mm.
of see what's out there a bit more.
Jessica, this has been such an absolutely fantastic conversation. I'm so grateful that you got to come on. We got to have this dialogue. Where can people find out more about you?
It
Go ahead.
was such a pleasure to chat. Yeah. I really enjoyed our conversation, and honestly, the time just flew by. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You can follow me on Instagram at Vanilla Quotients. My web shop and website is vanillaquotients.com. And that's
Awesome. Well, Jessica, it was an absolute pleasure, and I like wish you a
it.
great rest of your day.